Welcome back to the First Time Fantasy Podcast. Once again, I'm RJ here with my co-host Rick, and
So,
we have a special guest today, Mike Nicastro of YinzerCrazy Sports and YinzerCrazy.com. Mike, how's it going?
thanks for having me, guys. It is definitely not my first time playing fantasy, but I am happy to talk to anybody that is.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here. Everybody can go look at the stats and the analytics, but this is where we make it more discussion based and try to have some more fun with it for the people who don't want to stare at stat sheets all day. So, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about YinzerCrazy.com and what you and your team do and what you're trying to grow it into?
Happily, and you're a part of that team. I
Yes.
certainly don't want to gloss over that fact. We have an incredible team of writers over at YinzerCrazy.com. We're covering everything. We're trying to break the mold a little bit on Pittsburgh sports. To be quite frank with you, I think that it's time for a bit of the turning of the tides in terms of the Pittsburgh media. It's a bit kind of played out, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So I was hoping to create a bit of a breakthrough site, which I think we've accomplished. We partnered with a number of Pittsburgh athletes, Steelers, Penguins, Pirates alike, to kind of give a one of a kind, unique fan experience with these athletes that we talk to weekly. We're a little more laxed. We're not as classic AP style writing that you're going to find with somewhere like the Post Gazette, or a little more, I don't want to use the word barstool because they're a little more aggressive than us, I would
Yeah.
say, but we have a bit more of that relatable content feel, right? That's what we hope to accomplish. Like you said, introducing this podcast, I think the consumer is generally not the person who's going to care about, uh, you know, yards after contact on third downs
Hmm.
in the fourth quarter, right? They're going
Right.
to want to know things that they can relate to. People like my dad who still struggle to pronounce the word Roethlisberger. That's who we're trying to reach, right? Not always the consumers like us three. And so I think we've done a good job of that. Find us at YinzerCrazy.com. Subscribe to us on YouTube at YinzerCrazy for a bunch of our original series. And of course, our favorite, the Yinzer Crazy podcast. Well, my second favorite podcast, I should say, behind First Time Fantasy.
All right,
Oh,
and
nice.
the all those links will be in the description, and they'll also be just shown below. So go ahead and check them out. Great content. As Mike said, I'm a part of that team, so definitely check out my stuff, but everything as a whole. So, Mike, we ran through the structure of this, so let's get started on a division that we are all very familiar with, uh, the AFC North. So I'm going to begin with the Browns. First one on my list is no surprise. You have Nick Chubb. He's going to be a top 10 running back every year, uh, even more so in non PPR leagues, but I tend to play more PPR. The Kareem Hunt being in the picture at first, a couple years ago, it worried me, but they've somehow been able to share that with Nick Chubb still getting the majority of the touches. I wouldn't be worried about him at all. He had an injury plagued season last year, but having him as your RB1, not a problem. Baker Mayfield, I'm not a big Baker Mayfield fan, even not just from the perspective that I am a Steelers fan, but he's very hot and cold. The Browns do better when he doesn't throw the ball as much, and that can't be ignored from a fantasy perspective. He'll have weeks where he'll get a few dump touchdowns, but he's not going to put up 300, 400 yards every week. He's just not a safe bet. Uh, I would say you could take him if it was a two quarterback league, he'd be off the board. Otherwise, if you want to take him, stash him, hope that his surrounding weapons can get it done for him. Don't think that's a terrible idea, but I wouldn't take him at the risk of losing anybody else. I feel obligated to throw OBJ in here. I think he's overrated. We've we've seen it year in and year out where he is just not consistent enough to be your wide receiver one, really even your wide receiver two. Definitely at worst a flex guy, but I have to throw in, and Rick, we'll have to see if we can throw this video over top here, but there was a video going around on Twitter the other day that was saying about how dangerous the Baker OBJ combo will be this year. Before I even get into what the video is, we've seen the Baker OBJ combo. It's not dangerous. It hasn't been. Baker has done better when OBJ's off the field. But in this video, Baker threw the ball 3 feet behind him, and OBJ had to just reach out completely back. It's like that is a horrible representation of what they're trying to say. And the media makes it seem like this Baker OBJ thing. They both have big personalities, so it's going to translate to on-field success. That hasn't happened, and I don't think it's going to happen. I picked a sleeper for the Browns. It's kind of what I normally do, which is usually a cheating sleeper.
Here we go.
I picked Kareem Hunt, and I have him as a flex running back, a flex player, no matter what. But if Chubb goes down, this guy's going to put up big numbers. I also think he's a potential trade candidate to a team like Miami, who they have Myles Gaskin, but I don't know if he'll replicate what he did last year. But those are my players. So let's discuss what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, most of those think you hit right on the head. I would say I'm not a Baker fan, but I think if he could be efficient, he doesn't need to, because of how good their run game is with the combo of Chubb and Hunt, he doesn't need to throw the ball a ton like some other teams will need to. So if he could be a little more efficient, he could work his way into, like you mentioned, maybe a quarterback 2 if you're in a super flex league or a 2 QB league. I could see him being a streamer for some better matchups. But I've had OBJ a few years now on a few different teams, and you love him when he catches that touchdown to win your matchup for you. I think I remember winning a matchup when there was he ran like a 90-yard touchdown in or something last season, or it was maybe the season before that, but it was great. And you get to see that every once in a while. But like you said, they don't need to do it because their run game is so good. And then 2, I mean, if OBJ could stay healthy and if Baker could be a bit of a more accurate quarterback, then it actually would make sense. But with Jarvis Landry there as well, it is kind of tough taking OBJ ahead of him when you could just wait a few more rounds and grab a wide receiver that fantasy-wise will arguably perform just as well, if not better.
Yeah, I love, RJ, that you said that you referenced a tweet saying Baker to OBJ would be dangerous. I think the only thing that's been dangerous about OBJ lately is if you're the medical team of the Cleveland Browns, you're always in danger of him leaving the field because he hasn't been able to stay on it, quite frankly. The guy is dynamic when healthy, but if you're not on the field, what really can you how much confidence can you have in a guy to produce for not only your team, the Cleveland Browns, but your fantasy team? So I'll leave that there with OBJ. In terms of Nick Chubb, I love the player. I really do. We like to crap on the Browns a ton over at YinzerCrazy, of course. One, because I do think they're overrated heading into the season because of the reasons you guys mentioned regarding Baker Mayfield. I do think he's generally overrated by the general consensus. And you guys saw what the last time the Browns did when they had large expectations 2 years ago, the paper champions, right? Of course, that was before Coach Wisniewski, but, they still obviously underperformed. Nick Chubb is a beast, regardless. This guy scored 12 touchdowns last year. I know we're not getting into, crazy stats, but he truly is an elite top 5 running back in the NFL. He just got paid like it. He absolutely deserves it. I think at the end of the day, if I'm drafting in a standard league, he's a first-round pick for me. He's that good. He is consistent. He'll always punch it into the end zone if he's playing. And I think his value does decrease in PPR pretty significantly, to be honest with you. He's not a guy who's generally going to get a lot of targets or play a lot of third downs. Kareem Hunt will be the guy that spells him on those plays. So I think maybe a third rounder, honestly, in PPR, maybe a late second, you could argue for, because he's still a really consistent running back. But I love Chubb. I think he's one of the best players in all of football, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I just worry about his PPR value.
Yeah, he's one of the only Browns that I actually like on a personal. I mean, I don't know him obviously, but he seems like a good guy, unlike a lot of the Browns players do.
I thought you and Nick Chubb went way back.
Oh yeah, we were best friends, and he decided to go in the NFL. I stopped my football career, but
your Georgia days.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, the Browns, they have the weapons, they have options for fantasy. It's the only one that I would say is a top tier option is Nick Chubb, though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll give you
the
a sleeper, if you don't mind. It's a
Yeah,
deep sleeper, because of OBJ's injury history. I think there are two receivers to watch out for in this offense, not named Jarvis Landry, because Landry obviously is the other guy who always produces. He's always on the field. He's a PPR machine because he catches a lot of passes every season. But if you expect OBJ to go out again, like he always does, a guy I had on my team last year was Shard Higgins, played well in a pinch towards the end of the season last year. Baker likes him. He trusts him. You could tell, which is important. And he might be a guy in fantasy if you're picking, later in your draft and later in terms of rounds. And you need somebody, a fifth, sixth receiver who could have some upside. I like Higgins. I also like Donovan Peoples-Jones, who was a rookie last season, played well towards the end. There's been some reports out of camp that he's made a lot of progress in that offense and might be threatening to overtake a guy like Higgins. But either one of those guys will be in play for production if and when OBJ inevitably gets hurt.
and those are real sleepers, unlike mine. So thanks, Mike.
I'm gonna tack on one more here for when it comes to sleepers. Is I think Browns defense could really show up this year. They made a
Hooper.
Oh no, that's okay. But I think they added Clowney in the offseason. And I read an article, and I mean half the guys they added, I'm not even sure who they are, but they were talking up how good the defense was going to be, and that they've replaced, I believe it was like 8 of their guys who saw the most snaps last year on their defense. So that could be something. We already consider the Steelers defense to be great. You kind of expect the Ravens to show up too, so it could be interesting with the Browns. Kind of at least you making signing some guys who have potential to also be in there to really step up this division when it comes to defense already.
Yeah, well, Rick, you want to move on to the Ravens?
Yeah, first on the list, and has to be the most obvious, is you have Lamar Jackson. I mean, the guy had an insane 2019 season, and I guess in a way, I'm going to call it regression going into last season. I mean, he finished as QB1 2019, so, I mean, he was already at the top, and he ended up finishing as QB10 last year, which isn't terrible, but you'd like to see, maybe not drop that far. He also had a ton of rushing attempts last year at 159, which was more than both their running backs, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. I would expect them to pass the ball a little more because they signed Sammy Watkins, and then they also drafted Rashad Bateman, so that could be one way that they can really bust into the passing game a little bit more. And then for my second, and hopefully because they're going to, Jackson won't be running as much, they handed off to J.K. Dobbins a little bit more. He had a pretty good rookie campaign last year. They also got rid of Mark Ingram, so that opens up a handful of carries. I believe he had only about 70-ish, so it's not a ton. And they did sign Gus Edwards to a decent contract as well, so it looks like they want to keep him around as well. But at least instead of them splitting carries between 3, maybe you only see a split between 2 of them, with Dobbins getting a bit of the advantage. Another interesting thing I noticed was that neither Edwards or Dobbins had many targets or receptions last year. So PPR-wise, Dobbins could hurt you a little bit. Some of the reports out of camp was that the coaches wanted running backs more involved in the passing game, which, for obvious reasons, I believe Dobbins had about 20 or so targets for about 15 or so receptions, and Edwards was pretty similar with a few less in each of those. But I also believe the stat was that they were like literally last in the NFL when it came to that. And also neither of them had a receiving touchdown. So for PPR, you'd like to see them make some progress there, but it could hurt you a little bit. But of course, standard leagues, that wouldn't be the end of the world. And then third here, I've got Mark Andrews. I think he's by far their best tight end. So there isn't much competition you're going to worry about like some other teams. The only issue I have with him when it comes to fantasy is his current ADP. If you're not getting one of those 3 big tight ends that most people are looking for, it's kind of tough for me to take him. I believe his ADP is right around 45 right now. Depending on the size of your league, that could, if you're in like say an 8 or 10-man league, maybe you can get him in like the 5th, 6th round and it's not terrible. I know being in a 12-man league, I don't know that I'm going to want to use possibly a 4th round pick to actually get him. I think I'd be a lot more content with waiting and grabbing someone a bit later, or if he does slide because someone like Kyle Pitts ends up being taken above him, or even Hawkinson possibly, maybe he slides and he's not too bad of a find later in the draft. And then I don't think this is really a cheating sleeper pick here, but as of recently, Marquise Brown's ADP has dropped to 120. I don't
lower.
Is it?
No, higher, I guess. Like 180
in the thousands.
Yeah.
Oh, is it really? Wow.
No, I'm kidding.
But I think he'll be. I don't think he's going to be anything game changing. He's not going to win your league for you. I mean, it's a sleeper pick for a reason. And even with them signing Watkins and Bateman, Marquise Brown will probably be their top receiver, so you might be able to at least count on some decent volume there. And because you can get him so late, you've already got the majority of your roster, by pick 100 plus. Most of your rosters is pretty set there, but he's easily a good find later in drafts. And the only reason he might have slid recently, and I just grabbed that ADP number this morning from ESPN, was it was reported he had a bit of a hamstring injury as of, I believe, 2 days ago that was somewhat significant. So, I mean, by the time the actual season starts up, that probably won't be an issue, but it could be something to watch out for.
Yeah, the first thing that pops out to me, J.K. Dobbins. I actually just while you were talking, I checked on like the ESPN rankings. I like to look at those rankings because like 6 people all rank, and they actually usually have fairly decent rankings, so it gives you a good idea. They averaged out at J.K. Dobbins as the 17th running back. I think that's pretty high for him, as in I wouldn't draft him that early. Those numbers that you gave us about rushing attempts and pass catching attempts, I don't see that changing that much. I mean, you have Lamar Jackson, who is probably a better running back than either of those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was Jackson that had more attempts than rushing attempts than technically Dobbins being their RB1. So that doesn't help.
That worries me. I mean, I honestly think of Dobbins as the Kareem Hunt to Lamar Jackson's Nick Chubb, even though Lamar Jackson's a quarterback. It's gonna be deferred to Jackson. I don't trust Dobbins yet. Maybe after this year I'll think differently. But I actually wanted the Steelers to draft Dobbins last year instead of Chase Claypool. At this point in time, I'm glad they didn't. Got Najee Harris instead, which we'll talk about soon. But I don't trust him. I don't trust Dobbins this year. I wouldn't take him as my RB2.
I would agree with.
He slid very far.
I would agree with the 17 does sound a little high. I wouldn't be surprised, if he finished the season top 20, but I don't know that I'd want to take him at 17 either. That is does seem a little bit on the higher end.
Yep. The other thing you said that I was thinking about, the Mark Andrews. He's another guy that I didn't have him 2 years ago when I wished I would have.
I think that was when I drafted him like super, super late one of those years.
Yeah, and last year I did have him, and I wished I hadn't wasted a draft pick so early on him. Which version of him this year are we going to see? I would guess somewhere in between the 2019 and 2020 version, so a decent tight end. But you're going to see a lot of people reach for him, I would think. I wouldn't. There are some other options outside of him.
Yeah.
If, like you said, if it falls to like round 6-ish, 7, then he's still available.
That was really my main issue. Is his ADP is ESPN data was saying 4th tight end off the board, and I couldn't think like, okay, let's just say I get to draft a running back or 2 and take my wide receiver. I want to get one of the big 3 tight ends. And it's not that Andrews is bad, but I need something a little bit more consistent if I'm taking a tight end that early, because if not, I might as well just wait till round 10 plus potentially, grab a guy who could put up, maybe slightly worse numbers, but compared to spending a 4th round pick, we'll put up just as good numbers, getting someone in round 10 and not have to invest so much like draft capital into someone like Andrews.
I want to quickly correct myself. Before the dog pound jumps down your throat, RJ, I think last segment I called head coach Kevin Stefanski Stefan Wisniewski. So I just wanted to mention that as I sat here stewing in that for a minute, because the Steelers are always on my mind, and former Steelers guard Stefan Wisniewski somehow popped up there. But it doesn't matter right now, and the Browns never really matter. So it's an easy transition back into the Ravens. I'm a little higher on Dobbins than you guys, and it's for the exact reasons that Rick mentioned when he didn't name a receiver as part of one of their top fantasy assets, because this is a team that is going to run the ball over and over and over again at an 80% clip on offense, because it's what the personnel adheres to. It really is, with Lamar Jackson, Dobbins, and Gus Edwards. This is a quarterback who is really good, but I still don't trust his arm. Neither does John Harbaugh, neither does the AFC North, the defenses. You saw this offseason when guys like Juju Smith-Schuster and other top receivers turned down some pretty big money to go to Baltimore because they didn't trust their stats with Lamar Jackson. Their identity is going to be to pound the rock. Dobbins is the best running back on that team. I'd be shocked if he doesn't rush for at least 1,200 yards and score 10 touchdowns. I see him elevating into that elite category. Maybe not this year. He's probably still below Nick Chubb, probably below Najee Harris at the end of the day as well. I think maybe he's in that DeAndre Swift territory where he has a chance to take an elite level step, right, and potentially get into that top running back category. But I'm with you guys. Ultimately, he's not going to catch 50 passes a year. He's not that style of running back. He's more Chubb-esque in the sense that he's a ground and pound player, and that'll limit his value from a PPR perspective for sure. But for me, I think Dobbins is really good, and the offense that's going to be predicated on the run, he should be somebody you target in standard leagues. At second round, I would say. Maybe third.
Right. Yeah, I don't play in any standard leagues. I look at the stats and I try to look at those rankings too, because there are a lot of people who do. But yeah, from a PPR perspective, I mean, in one of my leagues that the draft is coming up soon, I am pick 9. So I have 9 and then 16, and then I don't pick again until like late 20s. And there's no chance in my head that I'm going to take him with any 3 of those picks. But I also lost miserably last year, so I guess take that information how you will.
That's why you got to play in like 8 leagues.
Yeah,
if you lose miserably in 1, you could win in 2, and you only mention the good one.
It's the volume. There it is. That's what
it's
you're
just
hoping.
Like J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, you're hoping J.K. gets if he gets the volume, then you might just be squared away, and that not catching as many passes might not hurt him so bad. So.
For what it's worth, I'm a fan of PPR to a degree. I like the hedge, the half-point PPR leagues. Mm-hmm. Anytime I'm a commissioner, which I've been in a bunch, I make the 0.5 because, obviously it's fantasy, and at the end of the day, it's not based on reality really whatsoever. But I don't like when a receiver catches a quick screen, runs and falls for a yard and gets a whole point for that. I think you should have to really earn those points. So I give the big 0.5 per cat.
Yeah. In the YinzerCrazy League, we're going to be drafting on Sunday, I think. Yeah, that's going to be the first half PPR that I've played. So we'll see how that goes, and maybe we'll switch it up because that is a frustrating scenario when that happens.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So I did want to throw one more thing in just because I really don't like the guy. Don't draft Marquise Brown. just don't. It's not worth it. All right,
he'll be on the shelf right with Odell too.
Yes,
he's already nursing a hamstring.
Yeah. So jumping over to the Bengals. Obviously, number 1, Joe Burrow. He had a horrible offensive line in 2020. he had weapons, but he still put up a respectable rookie season, and he showed flashes of being a legitimate number one fantasy quarterback before he almost died because he doesn't know when to stop running with the ball. That's the number one thing with him. It's even more than his offensive line. He needs to learn when to give up on a play. It's a lot easier to get away with that in college, like he did at LSU, but he's going to get seriously injured if he doesn't start throwing away some of these dead plays instead of trying to turn it into 2 to 3 yards. Uh, he got his guy in Jamar Chase. I think they should have drafted that offensive tackle from Oregon. I can't think of his name right now, but that would have given him some.
Stefan Wisniewski. No, I'm kidding.
No.
Penny Sewell.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think that's the way they should have gone. I'm guessing that they listened to Joe Burrow and getting Jamar Chase. They'll probably have that good rapport right away in the NFL. I think protection would have been the better option. I guess he disagrees. He believes in himself and his current group enough that they can get it done. Joe Mixon, every single year, this guy, everybody says he's going to be great. He's gonna really break through. He's going to be a top 10 running back. Every year, some sucker grabs him as a top 10 running back, and every year somebody just gets upset with it. I've never been that guy, luckily, but I'm starting. Oh, it looks like Mike's been that
Looks
guy.
like we have something in common.
I feel like eventually they have to be right, and every single year they rank him high. Probably a bad decision. If you're trying to keep it safe, I would avoid him. But if you want to run that risk, it's not that big of a risk to assume that he could be a good second round pickup at running back. And if he gets his potential from 3 to 4 years ago and how well he did, he could be your RB1. You could do a lot worse in any fantasy league than him when he is at his best and that team is humming. That's the other problem, is the team has to be humming. I could have really picked any of their receivers as a third option. I think T. Higgins has the slight advantage just because he already knows the system. He's built that rapport with Joe Burrow. He got over 100 targets with Burrow only playing 9-10 games last year. Didn't catch very many of them, 70-ish, I think. But he's going to get better. I think the rapport with Burrow is only going to get better. I wouldn't take him as your wide receiver 1 or 2. If you have 3 wide receivers, he'd be a solid wide receiver 3 or a solid flex pick. And I have Jamar Chase as my sleeper. And whenever I did my own wide receiver rankings, I actually have Higgins and Chase back-to-back with each other, with Higgins just getting that slight edge over him. And really my only reasoning is they produced magic at LSU. Why wouldn't it translate? I know the NFL is a much tougher place, but clearly Burrow and the management of the Bengals believe in that duo. I figured after seeing Joe Burrow in his rookie year, why not give him a shot in fantasy as a late flyer?
Yeah, I love the Bengals offense, and it's something that I haven't said in a long time. I am actually infatuated with them from a fantasy perspective, and it's mostly because of the one word: game flow. This is a team that is likely going to be facing a lot of deficits. They're going to be throwing the ball a ton. I don't see their defense being a top 15 unit in the NFL, so I think they're going to give up a lot of points, especially going against the likes of the Steelers, Ravens, and Browns, for half of the season. So I think, at least from a quarterback receiver perspective, they are going to score a ton of points. Now, for me, that would likely mean stock up for Joe Burrow, stock up for Higgins, Chase, and Tyler Boyd, and stock down for Joe Mixon, because obviously teams that are trailing aren't always running the ball as much. So I'm with you on Joe Burrow. I think if he stays healthy, which is a big question, it seemed to be the theme of this whole podcast so far, at least from my perspective, I think he can have an incredible year. I'm talking 35 touchdown type season. His weapons are that good. Chase was compared to Terrell Owens coming out of college. He has that level skill set of talent. Higgins was really good last year, even when Burrow went down with the likes of I can't even remember what the quarterback was that beat the Steelers. Random players out there. Ryan Finley, NC
Yep,
State.
that's it.
That's
Yep.
who it was. Somehow was still putting up numbers with the guys like Ryan
Yeah.
Finley. And Tyler Boyd's a PPR freak. He catches the ball from the slot all day, every day. So the only challenge with them is that there's only one football to go around. So obviously they're going to cut into each other's production. But as my wide receiver 2 on a good fantasy team, I would have no problem with Chase as my wide receiver 2. I have him ahead of Higgins a little bit. And if you're PPR slanted, I think Tyler Boyd is a great wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I left Tyler Boyd out just because exactly what you said. There's one football, and I think that at least eventually into the season, if not immediately, Burrow's going to start looking Chase's way more than anybody else, and it's just going to happen when you have that rapport and you already know what each other can do and you know the skill sets, and somebody's going to have to get edged out. I think it's Boyd, but it could honestly be anyone on that team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sold here on Joe Burrow as well. I think exactly what Mike was saying. Their defense isn't going to be as good. They're going to be forced to throw the ball. We already saw that last season with Burrow. You'd have to look up the exact number of attempts, but even in those 10 or so games he played, he had a ton of attempts, and I think I remember a game or two where he had like 40 plus. I mean, if they're doing that, then maybe all those receivers can benefit. And maybe it is another year where Mixon's projected as some, I don't think he's top 10 by any means. I don't know if anyone actually has him ranked that high. I wouldn't, but I don't think it's impossible for him to finish closer to 15. I don't want to take him as my RB1 for sure, but I wouldn't be uncomfortable taking Mixon as RB2 with maybe that RB1 upside. And pretty much same goes for other receivers, where if they do fall behind because of poor defense, you see Chase, Boyd, Higgins all being able to catch enough to sustain them, especially in PPR leagues when it comes to just how much they might have to throw the ball. And if Burrow can come through with that, maybe he does have 30-plus touchdowns and he ends up being a top 10 fantasy QB. I don't think any of it's unrealistic, but it could also wouldn't be a surprise if it crash and burn and you only have one good receiver and maybe Burrow still ends up being like a top 15-ish QB.
ESPN has Joe Mixon at number 12 for running backs,
Yeah.
just ahead of Najee Harris and DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've taken Mixon in the past, and I mean the injury stuff is bad enough, but I don't think I want to. It's one thing taking a risk on Saquon coming back from an injury, but I don't know about Mixon. I know that they did get rid of, I believe Giovanni Bernard is a Buccaneer now, I think. So at least Mixon has that like for sure number one job, and maybe he does get some extra work pass catching, but still 12 is seems a little bit too much for me.
Yeah, but that running back that's right behind him, Najee Harris, brings us right into the final team, and I will hand it over to you, Mike.
Wow, what team is that? I think this one, yeah. So I'll start with this. If you follow me on any mediums or have read my work over the past few years, you know that I am an avid Ben Roethlisberger supporter, through and through. The guy is a winner. The guy is a leader. The guy is a terrific quarterback. It doesn't mean he is a fantasy darling. And I rarely would slander the name of Ben Roethlisberger, but he should not be your QB1 heading into your fantasy league this year. Listen, if ultimately you have a top-of-the-line starting quarterback in fantasy, a Kyler Murray, a Lamar Jackson, a Patrick Mahomes, and you back him up with Ben and one of those guys goes down, sure, Ben will step in and he'll do a heck of a job. But he's not the guy that you are going to want as your QB1 on your 10-person or 12-person fantasy league. If it's a 14, 16-person, sure, I think it's fair. So I want to just throw that out there right away because he's not in the top 3 of my list. Not for because I have any agenda against Ben Roethlisberger. I think their Steelers are going to have a terrific season. I think Ben is going to have a terrific season. But that's in part due to the fact that he's going to be able to turn and hand the ball off to the number one fantasy asset on that Pittsburgh Steelers team and also throw the ball to him on swing passes and other checkdowns. And that's Najee Harris. Najee Harris is the complete package. I really don't need to go into great detail on his skill set. He has a Le'Veon Bell type ceiling in fantasy. You guys remember what Le'Veon Bell did with the Steelers when he was here. And even in that case, there was only one football to go around with Antonio Brown, with guys like Martavis Bryant. Even played a year with Heath Miller still in that same system. And he still outproduced everybody, every single running back at that position, and nearly caught 100 passes one year. Najee Harris has that type of ceiling, upside, and potential. As long as he stays healthy, of course. I expect him to get 20 to 25 touches a game, catch maybe 5 passes a game. He's going to be relevant in standard, PPR, keeper, dynasty. I don't care what you're playing. Najee Harris is going to be a focal point of the Steelers offense, and he's going to be somebody that can win you a fantasy league, right? We always look at these guys at the end of the season and we're saying, oh my gosh, how did I get this guy at the end of round 2 or early round 1? Well, he's going to be a guy going top 3 next year, right? He's going to elevate to Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey level after this season. He's just that good. And hopefully I don't jinx him if he gets hurt because I just said all of that. Anyway, he's my number 1. Once again, with the disclaimer that I'm not putting Roethlisberger on this list. He's still going to outscore these guys technically, but when it's relative to position, I don't have him in the top 3. The next guy I have somehow is Deontay Johnson. And believe it or not, the Steelers receivers, of course, are elite across the board in terms of talent. But Deontay last season led the NFL in targets through week 8, I want to say. He is Ben Roethlisberger's number 1 target when he is out in the field. Even with Chase Claypool, even with Juju Smith-Schuster and the rest of the cast out there. Once again, there's one football to go around, so they're all going to kind of cannibalize each other in a sense. But if there's one Steelers receiver to have, it's Deontay Johnson. He's the PPR guy. He has the most upside. Sure, you'll get some weeks of bust instead of boom, where he has 4 catches and probably 2 fumbles and 3 drops. But his ceiling is just bigger than the other guys. And the third guy I would have is Chase Claypool then. Because I do see some Megatron in him. Obviously, his nickname is Mapletron with the Canadian flair there. He's an elite talent. He's a red zone weapon from the Steelers' own 20-yard line. You saw that last year in the game against Denver where he took an 80-yard touchdown from Ben Roethlisberger on an opening drive. He could score 10 to 12 touchdowns this year. I would not be totally shocked. I could see 10 to 12 touchdowns for Chase, 90 to 100 catches for Deontay, and then Juju, of course, will still be solid wherever they put him on or line him up on the field. But those are my top 3 with the disclaimer that Big Ben is not your QB1 in fantasy. Najee Harris, I think, is a middle second round pick in both standard and PPR, but will finish the season much higher. Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool should not be your wide receiver 1 in fantasy, but I think wide receiver 2 fringe will make you happy.
Now, Mike, I know you went to some of that Steelers training camp that went on over at Heinz Field. Deontay Johnson's hands, are they going to be an issue this year?
It's a good question because I sent out a tweet and it caused an uproar on Steelers Twitter. I simply was pointing something out that Deontay Johnson had dropped a pass, right? Which it's a story. If a guy has a history of drops and he drops a pass in practice with a lot of eyes on him, people are going to want to know that. Do I think it was something that we should hit the panic button about and talk about him being supplanted and benched and cut? Absolutely not. The guy has way too much talent. His effort has been genuine. His determination and motivation has been genuine. Sometimes it's just a physical problem. You get the yips sometimes. I'm worried about it. I'm not going to lie. It was a problem last season. There's no other way around it. It was a problem. And if it's something that happens early in the season, I could see it getting in his head. And of course, it's what I'm going to be tweeting about because it will be a story at that point. So I wouldn't avoid him in fantasy drafts because of it, but proceed with caution.
Yeah, and obviously, Najee Harris is a beast and is going to be a fantasy beast. Are there any of the normal top, like your top guys, your Saquon Barkley, your CMC, your Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, that you would actually consider taking Harris before any of those guys?
Good question. Really good question. If it's a standard league, I'm taking him over Alvin Kamara. and I know we don't play a lot of standard, as you guys mentioned. But there are some who do. Kamara is so PPR dependent unless he's scoring 6 touchdowns on Thanksgiving against the Vikings, which is absolutely an aberration. That's not going to happen again. He is so PPR dependent. Drew Brees was a check down monster. He was one of the most accurate passers to ever play the game of football. You are now supplanting him with Jameis Winston, who hopefully can at least see at this point post LASIK surgery. But this is a guy, if you remember with Tampa, was chucking it down the field to Mike Evans with really just no regard for NFL quarterbacking. And I think Kamara loses a lot of value this year. I think defenses are going to force whoever it is, Jameis or Taysom Hill, to beat them through the air. And with Michael Thomas now out, you got 11 guys watching Alvin Kamara, at least until Thomas is back. I would take him over Alvin Kamara in standard for sure, and I would consider it in PPR, even though Kamara should still catch a handful of passes. Saquon Barkley is another candidate just because I don't trust the Giants, for one, and his health obviously is a concern. But I think I would still safely take Barkley over Harris because if it played out the opposite way, you'd really be kicking yourself for making that reach. Derrick Henry has to slow down at some point. We've been saying it for 3-4 consecutive years, but it hasn't happened. So I just don't think it ever will. I think he's going to play until he's 75 years old and score 20 touchdowns every year. So I'm not taking him over him. I also expect Zeke Elliott to have a big bounce back year if Dak Prescott is healthy. He was the number 1 fantasy running back just a couple of years ago with a healthy Dak, with a Cowboys offense that was humming. I'm not saying he's going to be a number 1 running back, but he can be right in that C-Mac, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry group. So I wouldn't take him over Zeke, but Kamara is the guy for the reasons mentioned that I'd consider.
Real quick, Rick, before I let you jump in, I have one more question for Mike. The Steelers tight end battle, how do you see that playing out from a fantasy perspective?
Dude, it's like you read my notes or something because that was going to be my sleeper. It's a perfect segue. It truly is a perfect segue. I don't even have it. I was going to say my sleeper, and it is a deep sleeper yet again, unless you're playing a deep league, a dynasty league, or a keeper league. That's Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, the Steelers are very high on this guy to take him in the second round where they did with such an emphasis on the offensive line, obviously that being a huge need. But listen, he wasn't nicknamed Baby Gronk without a reason. He has that skill set. He's a mismatch nightmare for linebackers. He has incredibly steady hands. And Eric Ebron, it just isn't that good. I'm sorry. I hope you're not watching, Eric. But, you know, if you're a liability in the blocking game, you can't drop passes. It's that simple. We saw it too often from him last season. I think Ben likes him to a degree. You saw him go to him in the red zone early and often. But to me, he is a glorified 5th receiver. He's a chubby receiver is who I see Eric Ebron. He's a guy that you might throw up a fade to in the red zone occasionally and hope he comes down with it. But from what I'm hearing, seeing, reading, and gleaning just from the overall takeaway, Pat Freiermuth is going to take his job sooner rather than later. And at the very least, he's going to start in 2 tight end sets from day one, from snap one against the Buffalo Bills. I think he's got an outside chance to catch 50, 60 passes, be around that 750-yard mark, and cash in 4 or 5 touchdowns, which makes for a really, really sturdy tight end 2 / fill-in tight end if you have a top elite guy like a Kelsey, Kittle, or Waller on a bye week.
Yep. All right, Rick?
I mean, you guys hit most of the main points there. I mean, I love the Steelers. I have to say, besides Najee and maybe Deontay, I'm not too high on them this year when it comes to fantasy in particular. I kind of feel like you're getting a lottery ticket with any of their, between Deontay, Juju, and Claypool. We saw last year any one of them could have a great week. Claypool had a few of them. We got to see him catching some of those deep passes, and that was encouraging. And then the next week, it was like he wasn't even there. It was. I think I picked him up as a streamer a few weeks, and sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But it kind of feels, at least when it comes to fantasy, and if you're aiming for that consistency, I think some of them. I'm fine with taking Deontay. I think he is that wide receiver 1 upside. But at least when it comes to Juju and Claypool, I think you're definitely kind of getting more of a lottery ticket to see, who's the favorite target that week, or does Claypool, do they hand one off to him again? He runs one in and catches a deep one and has a great week because of it. And I mean, just like every other Steeler fan, I think we're all excited to see Najee. Let them feed him the ball, and as long as that line can do enough, hopefully he can finish the rest, and we see him have a ton of yards. And being in a PPR league, definitely not. I know you mentioned taking him over Kamara, of course, in standard leagues, but with him being a rookie as well, and a bit of concern about their line, I would think maybe outside of Pittsburgh-based fantasy leagues like ours, I'm not going to be shocked if in a few of my drafts, people are taking him a bit early, just being fans in the first place. But I don't think there's anything wrong with grabbing him in the second round. I think that even for PPR leagues, I think that would be plenty fine.
So Mike and Rick, before we close up here, what Rick and I did for episode 1, we each chose two, the top 2 fantasy players out of the AFC North. Not necessarily if you had number 1 overall pick who you would take, but from a positional standpoint. I surprised Rick with this last week, so I'm going to surprise you with this today, and I'm going to let you start, Mike.
Oh my gosh. So give me the breakdown once again. These are the top two guys who are going to finish 1 and 2 in scoring, or 2 guys?
No, the 2 guys positionally that you like the best out of the AFC North. So it does,
Sure.
Obviously Joe Burrow is going to finish ahead of pretty much all of these players, but not just from points, but positionally.
Fair enough. Okay. And relative to ADP, I'll hit that as well. I'm going to go number 1 with the guy that we started the conversation with, Nick Chubb, who I think is pretty much a sure thing as it gets. I really do. The Browns are going to be a good team, even if I don't think they're going to be a Super Bowl winning team. Their roster is really solid on paper. The offensive line is excellent. They're going to be winning games late. Nick Chubb is going to tote the rock a crap ton. He's going to get to that guaranteed 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. So I'm going some safe and stability with my number 1 choice. Man, there are a lot of names popping into my mind for number 2. I think a true deep sleeper. I think Jamar Chase is a deep sleeper. I think he can win somebody in fantasy league this year. He's not going to be my number 2 guy. I think that another player that I really like, I mentioned earlier, is J.K. Dobbins. I think Dobbins is a guy that we're going to be talking about, similar to Najee Harris, that will be drafted in the first round next year. People are going to say, oh my gosh, why did I take Alvin Kamara over him? He's elevating. Or, I'm sorry, why did I take Joe Mixon over him? There's a better example of players that we just used. Number 2, I got to go Najee Harris. It's just fitting. I got a Steelers shirt behind me. I got a Steelers shirt on. I got a YinzerCrazy hat on my head. How can I leave Najee Harris out of that discussion? I think at the end of the day, he pushes Nick Chubb for the top fantasy producer outside of quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson's going to outscore them. But outside of quarterbacks, relative to ADP, everybody knows Lamar Jackson is going to go in the top 3 quarterbacks. Everybody knows that Nick Chubb is going to go in the top 6 to 7 running backs. Najee Harris is in that 13, 14 range. His ADP is going to climb significantly. He should be closer to that 6, 7 mark. So that's where I'll go. I'll give you Chubb. I'll give you Najee Harris. Ignore the quarterback. Draft Ben Roethlisberger, just like I said. Start.
All right, Rick, you?
All right, so I'm also going to go with Chubb. I think he's definitely one of the most consistent options there. Even missed a few games last season, so it'll be nice to see if he stays healthy. He had plenty of touchdowns. I think he missed about 4 or so games. And I think Mike mentioned earlier he had 12 touchdowns, I think. So maybe getting him a full schedule in will be even more beneficial to some of his numbers. And then second, unsurprisingly, I will. It's a tough one. I as much as I want to say Najee, I think I'm going with Lamar. It's hard not to pick him. Because he's going to run the ball enough, and if we do see some progress when it comes to the passing game there, I mean, Like I mentioned, they drafted Bateman, and then they also went out and signed Sammy Watkins. None of the other guys like a home run pick, but they've got, maybe we see some more consistency there where they want him to actually throw the ball a bit more, and he doesn't run as much, and we don't see any injury issues or anything weird like that. He's still going to run some of those touchdowns in. We're still going to see some of those longer 20, 30, 40 plus yard runs, and he's just one of those guys that can break that off whenever he sees the opportunity. So yeah, Lamar definitely is my second there.
You said it earlier, Rick. In 2019, he led all players in fantasy points. All players. Mm-hmm. Not just quarterbacks. Everybody. So it's hard to disagree with
that. Yeah. And the two for me, Lamar Jackson was one of mine, which for all the reasons Rick said. I don't think he's going to fall too far because last season he ended 10th overall in quarterbacks. I think most people are going to overlook that and jump right back to the 2019 season, and myself included. I think I would probably take Mahomes and Kyler Murray over him, and that might be it. And that's also just because I'm a Patrick Mahomes fanboy. But I would, yeah, the guy's great. But I think my second is going to be Najee Harris. I mean, between him and Chubb has some injury history. He also has Kareem Hunt breathing down his neck right behind him. Najee Harris has Kalen Ballage and Benny Snell. I don't think I need to say any more than that. That's just it's his job to lose, and as long as he stays healthy, I agree with you, Mike, that he's gonna far go past his ADP, and people will be kicking themselves for not taking him earlier. So yeah, that's the AFC North. Once again, we have Mike Nicastro here of YinzerCrazy.com. We'll have all of his links below. Follow him on Twitter. Follow YinzerCrazy on Twitter, YouTube, everything they have. And anybody have anything to close it out?
Yeah, I'll hit you with something. So everybody out there, if you're a first-time player or if you're a long-time player playing fantasy, evaluate your team as you're drafting, right? Think about boom versus bust. If you have a guy who is consistent, you can afford to take a higher ceiling player later. For example, if you have a steady receiver that is going to catch you 100 passes, a Devontae Adams, right? A guy you just plug in, you can be more inclined to take a Chase Claypool, who 1 week might have 2 catches for 8 yards, and then the next week have 11 catches for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. You can live with that boom or bust potential when you have sure things. Now, if your wide receiver 1 is CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase, I wouldn't feel as comfortable taking a Chase Claypool because then you're going to have some bad weeks mixed in. So evaluate the scope of your team when you're drafting, and just don't take Eric Ebron.
That's a solid way to end it.
That's some solid advice. So I will not be letting any of the people from my other leagues listen to this before we draft. But Mike, thanks for coming out and joining us, and we'll hit you guys next week with, I believe, Rick, what is it, AFC West?
I believe so, yeah.
All right, thanks for listening. We'll see you guys later.